Hello, everyone. My name is Luigi Franciosi with this edition of Apex Hours, and I'll be going over cloud flows, an introduction, and look into best practices as well as a few intermediate concepts. Uh, Again, my name is Luigi Franciosi. My background's in financial services and the insurance industry, and I've had many different roles inside of the Salesforce ecosystem, including admin, business analyst, consultant, and developer. So for today, we're going to do an introduction into flows, and we're going to talk about two types of flows: auto launch flows and screen flows, what they are, how they work at a high level, and some general use cases where we'd use them. Going through those two different types of flows, we'll also go through what the flows are and elements and manager section inside of the Cloud Flow Designer inside of Salesforce. So inside of Salesforce, we have many different types of process automation tools that we can use. We can use the simple workflow rules, stepping it up into a little more advanced logic. We can get into process builders, and then we can get into flows, which we're going to talk about here today. Flows, I've heard it described before as visual coding. It's right now the most complex type of process automation that you can develop inside of Salesforce using all clicks, no code. You could use code with it, but you can get really, really far just using clicks. It's all declarative work, and it's really, really powerful and allows you to achieve uh, significantly higher complexity levels than you would be able to do using just workflow rules. Using that simple type of if-then logic. If you're new to flows, it may be intimidating and you might feel lost where to begin, but it's still an admin tool, right? You keep that in mind as you go into flows and teaching yourself how to use flows. You still need to have that engineering mindset because a lot of the concepts and ideas that are leveraged inside of flows are similar to custom code. But don't let that scare you. Just practice. Make mistakes, uh, go through different iterations of your flow, create many different versions, and you'll be fine. Okay, so in the setup section, if you go to flows in Quick Find, I have a lot of different options here, but really what we're going to go to is flows. And from here, you can see all the flows that I currently have created. And if you look here under process type, there's two different kinds right here. I have auto launch flow and screen flow. A screen flow is a way for admins to create a process guided through various screens with clicks. The general idea is to prompt a user with a window to input some values. Based on those values, I can make a decision in my flow on where to take the user. This process could be used for like a sales process, customer support process. Potential use case could even be the creation of a new record. Sometimes in Salesforce, there's a tremendous amount of data that needs to be added to a record to be able to save. This puts us in a position where we have one giant top-down form that requires a user to continue to scroll down and enter data. If I have validation rules or required fields, then I have to go back up into that page and find out where it is and correct it. It's really not a great user experience if I'm trying to save a big record inside of Salesforce. As opposed to having this giant top-down form, I can put different segments of that data inside of various elements in a screen and walk through that, clicking next, or even allowing the user to pause. I can make decisions in that data throughout my flow so I can make it more dynamic on how the records will be created in the end without having to show a ton of validation rules right at the end when I try and save. I can have some of that built-in validation logic as I'm stepping through each stage of the flow itself. By putting this type of record creation in a flow, now I have the ability to repurpose it. The same flow, if built generic enough, could be used to input data after a meeting, or I could launch it from an incoming call. Having the data segments in flow from beginning to end will allow my call center rep to have a smooth conversation with the end user by taking them through a logical flow of questions. There's several different ways to launch a screen flow. You can launch them through a button click. You can call its URL to have it launched from some other process, or as I mentioned, you could trigger it from an incoming call. These guided screen flows can do many different things for me. I can reduce the amount of validation rules I need for data entry. It provides me with a logical flow of data that can dynamically change based on values inputted. A nice screen flow allows me to guide a user through a business process and avoid giant top down bottom screens. Whereas a guided screen flow allows me to guide a user through a business process, an auto launch flow allows me to perform complex processing on the back end without a user knowing. You can think of it like a process builder or workflow rule, but the complexity potential is much greater. An auto launch flow is sometimes called a headless flow because there's no GUI that a user interacts with. A flow can be invoked by another process like process builder, or you can call its URL directly. An auto launch flow invoked from a process builder can be thought of as an apex trigger and a trigger handler. An Apex trigger in that reference is, the trigger code that calls other Apex classes that perform all of the processing. So in this case, process builder would be the trigger that I set to act whether a record's created or updated or edited, and then it can do some determination in it. I can make a decision whether or not I want to go to a flow or maybe send an email, and then I can actually, if I choose to launch a flow, do a lot more complex processing. Uh, Flows offer a ton of potential. Salesforce has put a tremendous amount of effort and energy into flows, and Salesforce has completely redesigned the editor and the designer for flows. And now it's called Cloud Flow Designer, and it's a lot more user friendly than what it used to be several years ago. It's a lot faster, it's a lot more responsive, and it's the type of user interface you'd expect from a modern day application like Salesforce when you're developing new things. The first flow I'm going to create is an auto launch flow. So I'm just going to click new flow right here. I'm going to select auto launch flow, click create. Okay, and so now we're immediately taken to the Cloud Flow Designer UI. This is where we actually begin creating our flow and dragging elements to the screen, and this is where all the construction happens. So on the UI, you see obviously it begins with start. That's something that every flow is gonna have when you open this up, and then on the left hand side here, I have all my elements that are provided to me by Salesforce that I can leverage inside of my flow. So I'm going to start going over these as I create my flow, and I'll get into all the options that you have using these and why we would use them. So for the auto launch flow, this type of flow can be either called from a process builder or it can start on its own on some type of DML event. DML being data manipulation language. It could be set to trigger when a record is created or updated. So for this example, that's what we're going to do. We're not going to launch this from a process builder. We're going to launch it when a record is changed. So created or updated. All I did was double click on start. I'm going to choose this option here, new or updated records. And I'm going to say when a record is created or updated. So for this example, I'm going to choose account. So the requirement for this is basically to set an active flag, either true or false, if the account has a phone number. So it's a pretty simple example. I wanted to keep it pretty simple for today, just to give you all an overview of what flows are and how to use them. So this will be a pretty simple example. Just bear with me. So okay, so now that I've chose when my flow is going to start, when an account is created or updated, I see on the left hand side my options have changed, and that's just because this type of flow, right, is limited. So when you do an auto launch flow that's not being kicked off from some other type of process, you really only have the ability to make logical decisions in your flow, change how the outcome of the flow itself, but it's always going to be started when a record is created or updated. So that's how this flow is going to start. There's no other way for me to start it. So the first thing that I need to do is knowing that whenever an account is created or updated, I'm going to kick off this flow. So the first thing that I'm going to do in this is make a decision. So all I'm doing is dragging that element onto the screen. And so per my requirement, I need to set a flag on whether or not my phone number is filled out on my account. So I'm going to do a check here. So my decision allows me to look at the record, and based on some conditions, I can choose alternate outcomes. So in this case, um, we're only going to have two outcomes. So if you look here, I have a new outcome by default, right? It's going to allow me to create an outcome, and then there's a default outcome. So if this outcome doesn't evaluate to true or false or whatever I set it to, by default, there's always going to be an option for me to map something to. So in this case, I'm going to check if a phone number is null or not. So on the account record, I'm going to verify that the phone number has been filled in. Is So it's really important that you always fill in your description fields. It's something that'll help you debug your flow or anything for that matter inside of Salesforce later on down the road. Maybe you built it this year and you're not going to revisit it for an entire year. Going back, looking at the description fields that you've filled in can really help. And so, make sure you give yourself something that's descriptive, a little bit brief, but take the extra minute to fill out the description field. It's really important, and for your org too, right? You may move on to another opportunity, a new org, and leaving breadcrumbs behind for the next admin or developer to look at and pick up is something that's gonna really help. And you would be thankful if somebody did that for you. So please do that. So I'm going to say check if the account has a phone number. And if you're working in a company that uses something for your work, like your work management, like a tool like Jira or something like that, or maybe you have a tool built in Salesforce and you have story cards, right? Maybe I have a story card number or a user request. That's always a good thing to put inside of these description fields, because instead of duplicating the all the detail that you've captured in that user story record in whatever system you're using, you can just reference it here, and I can say user story, whatever the user story number is, or however you guys are capturing that. A reference to another another system is a good use of description fields in my opinion, because it takes you to something that has a ton of detail in it. So um, I'm going to have two outcomes here. One is going to be if my phone number is null, and one is going to be if my phone number is not null. So I'm going to call this is phone number null. And so null meaning that it's empty. There's no value in it, and I'm going to I have the option to choose when to execute this, and I'm going to say when all conditions are met. And for this one, I'm only going to have one condition, but I could have multiple conditions inside of one outcome, and get really complex. But again, for here, we're going to do just a simple example. So I could choose to create a new resource, um, and I have different options available to me. A variable would be something that I could create to store a value in, or set a value to, and reference it. A constant is something that is always the same, right? The value of that doesn't change. Whereas a variable, I could dynamically choose whether that variable can change, right? What's inside of it. But a constant would be something like true or false. So it's always going to be true. It's always going to be false. And I would use that constant as uh, a decision point, right? Whether this evaluates to this constant or that, I can choose what to do. A formula is a formula. For this one, text template, if I wanted to, I could put in a text template here. It's a text field. And stage. But for now, all we're gonna do is we're going to use a predefined resource for us. So it's going to be called the global variable. And in this case, because it's an auto launch flow, we're going to use the account record. So I from the beginning of the flow, when I double clicked on that start and I chose that it's going to be auto launch, it allowed me to choose an object. And so automatically, this flow knows that I'm going to be on the account object, and I automatically get all my fields for my account, which is really nice. So it's doing a lot for me already. And so all I'm going to do here is grab the phone number field. Okay. And I know that I'm going to check and see if the phone number is null. And so there's a couple different ways I could do it. I could say is null, and I could use one of those global constants I was just talking about, and I could say true. I could say equals empty string. That's another global constant. But we're going to do is null. True. So I could leave my default outcome listed as default outcome, but in this case, I'm going to change it to phone number is not null. And so, in this case, right, I think going back and looking at this, I want my decision to be either phone number is null or phone number is not null. So, I don't really like this name that I just put in here, so I'm going to go ahead and change it. So, naming things is really important. You want to be careful, and you want to, make sure you're considerate of how you're naming stuff, right? If you just go through and you just kind of start typing quickly and just use the first thing that comes to your mind, when you go back to it, it might not make as much sense as it did during the time that you were making it. So, as you're building these and as you're going through them, make sure that you're putting in a lot of thought and care around how you name things, right? So that simple change I made by moving is from the front until, to right here, I think makes it a lot clearer, because my decisions are going to be phone number is null or phone number is not null. So, again, this is the default outcome. I don't need to set any logic, because it's going to, if this doesn't evaluate to true, it's automatically going to fall into this. So now I'm going to connect these two. Just like that. All I did was click on the little dot on the element and then drag it to the next one. All right, so in this I have two decisions. So now, because I'm already in the record, right, this flow has started when the record, when the account is created or updated, and now I have a decision on what to do based on the phone number field on the account. I'm going to assign the value of active of the active flag on the account. So again, my requirement was if the phone number is filled in on the account, I'm going to set the active flag to true or no. So because I'm already in the record, this record is either being created or updated. All I'm going to be doing is assigning a value to that record. So I'm going to say set active flag to true. Setting the active flag to true based on the phone number. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to set a variable. So the record itself, again, I'm going to go back to this, grab the record that started this, and I'm just going to choose a different field in this case. So I have a custom field called active, and per my requirement, that's what I want to interact with. But I could certainly choose any other field or multiple fields if I wanted to based on this. But for now, I'm just going to set this to true. It's a checkbox, yes or no. So in this case, I'm going to choose yes, and that's it. So now I have this other element here. So, going back to naming things, right, and choosing, what I wanted my outcomes name to be. When I drag this here and connect these two, I'm going to get an option of what I want to choose, right? And so for my requirement, my active my active flag is only going to be set to true if there's a phone number. So if it's not null. So I'm going to choose this. And you can see here that it tells me what decision I map this to. So I'm going to go ahead and grab another assignment. No. If phone number is blank, set active flag to no. Okay. All right. So, I think it's important to make sure that you're, keeping your screen organized. So there's some nice little tools here too that allow you to help organize your screen. Um, I can click this little box here that allows me to grab everything. I can highlight what I wanted to. I don't have to grab everything. I could just, grab those two if I wanted to. I can center it on the screen. I can zoom out. I mean, if I had a really big flow, this would be a pretty helpful feature. For this case, we don't have a ton of elements on the layout here, so I'm going to zoom back in here. So the other elements that we didn't talk about were loop and get records. So in this case, get records is kind of like a query. So I could choose to get another record, right, and store that in the flow in a variable in another element, and make a decision on an additional record. And that would be for something more complex, right? So if I wanted to get an associated record to the account that initiated this flow, I could leverage this. But for this case, we're keeping it really, really simple. And loop um, would allow me to, do just what it says here, iterate over a collection or value of records. So variables can store, an individual field. They can store one record, or they can store many records. So if I wanted to say maybe I wanted to get all the opportunities associated to my account, I could loop over those opportunities and filter them, and choose to maybe update opportunities of a certain type. Maybe I have different opportunity types. So, that gets into more complex logic that, again, we're not going to be going over here. I'll be doing that in another session. And if I look at the manager now, I can see that I have some more things here, right? So when you start a new flow, you don't have anything in here. So this just kind of shows me the elements that I'm leveraging in the flow here. So this decision obviously maps to this element here. Outcomes. If I were to have created different variables or things like that, then they'd appear here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to say set active flag. So for the label itself, I'm going to keep it pretty generic for the flow, the entire flow itself, because it's either going to be set to true or false. But the intent of this flow is to set the active flag. So, you could keep this pretty generic here because, this flow might change in the future, right? What this flow was initially designed for was to set the active flag on an account record. As you go through building this, your requirements may change, right? Your decisions might get a little more complex, and you might have to change exactly how you're doing your assignments. So, I like to keep it specific and a little bit short, right? It doesn't have to be overly verbose, because it could change. So, but again, make sure you're filling this out. And if this was created for a specific story, it might be worth denoting that in here as well. So, okay. So in here, I mean, I know that I'm not going to change the type of flow that this is, because I want this to be the same. Um, yeah. So interview label, what you see here, I'll get into interviews a little bit more when I go through the screen flow, but basically each instance in a flow is an interview, and that'll make more sense. I think I'll be able to better describe it when I go over the screen element. So for now, um, you know, I don't need to do anything else. I have this here. Okay, so I saved it, and I can see here I have run, debug, active, or save as. So if I were to click run this, it's not going to do anything, because this is only going to start when a record itself is being created or edited. So, this isn't receiving any input, right? I don't have a way to manually send an input to this, because this flow is going to be acting on the record that started it. So, when this flow starts, the account record, it's going to be looking for that account ID to know which record to modify. And the debug screen is really, really awesome in Flow too. But for auto launch Flow, because I'm starting when a record is created or updated, and I'm not set, I don't have a way to manually set an input on this specific example. It's going to do the same thing as the other one. So we'll go over the debug page in the screen flow um, uh, when I go over the screen flow. So, I'm going to click activate. I'm going to click back. So I'm going back here to the flow screen. If I go here over to the right, I can view my details and versions, which is pretty cool, because I can choose to activate this or deactivate it from here. But I can see a little more information about it, and I can see a URL to it. But for this, it's an auto launch flow, so it's going to be running on a record, and this is going to be before a save happens. So on an account record, as I'm editing it or creating it, it's actually going to save the value. It's going to perform this logic on the on the account record before the database saves it. So I'm going to test this out. I'm going to go into the sales app. I'm going to go to an account. I'm gonna go to an account where I don't have a phone number. So let's go here. I'm gonna go to details. I see my phone number's blank, and I have my active flag down here. So let's test this and see if it works. So if the flow works, if the logic works as expected, when I enter in a phone number, automatically the active flag should be set to true or false. So I'm going to leave it as none. All right, so let's see. And look at that. It got activated. So it's telling me that it's working. So let's go ahead and do another test. Let's delete the phone number. Okay, and it's not active anymore. So there you go. So that's basically an auto launch flow. That's how that's a very simple example of how an auto launch flow could work. But the potential is great. So I could choose a lot more. I could choose to update a lot more fields on the record. I could choose to get a lot more specific in my decision making as I'm going through the records that started this flow. So it's a really, really nice tool. So I'm going to leave that as active, and I'm going to create a new flow now. So now we're going to go into a screen flow. So I click new flow. I'm going to click screen flow. Okay. So, automatically I have slightly different elements. So, now I have a screen element that I can choose to interact with here. And the start button on this one, if I can double click on it and click on it and click on it, it's not giving me any options because this flow is going to be started um, when I invoke it. And I'm going to choose to invoke it by publishing this in a number of ways. So I could either have this flow launched from another process and, show a user a screen to do some stuff. Um, in this example here, I'm going to expose the flow to an end user with a button. So I'm going to put this flow behind a button, and that's what's technically going to start it. So, but the behavior of this is that there's always a start button. That's just what Salesforce decided to do. So, if I go here, I don't have anything here. You're going to see in this example, I'm going to be creating more variables, and you'll see more stuff in this manager section at the end of this. So I'm going to grab my screen, and I can see here that I have a lot of options to me. So I have, um, out of the box components that Salesforce provides to me, address, checkbox group, currency, date, time. And so, all these do allow me to, enter in values into the screen and stick to the Salesforce Lightning Design System. You can see right the icons and things like that. All are very cohesive with Salesforce itself, and um, address being a compound field, I can see that it already gives me all those field values itself. So I could create an individual text field for each part of an address, but for this one, it's pretty nice. It gives me all the different options. I'm not going to use those for this one. I'm going to keep this one really simple again, um, to moderately complex. In this example, I'm going to be creating a new customer process. So in this, we'll be creating an account, a contact, and an opportunity, and we're going to have them all relate to each other and save. So as a sales user or some type of end user in my org needs to create new customers, they're going to be able to go through and easily create them. So in this case, I'm going to um, grab some text fields. And so for this, because they're creating new customers, per my requirements, I'm going to call this customer name. You can choose to make fields required or not. Um, it's important to make sure that your users are entering data correctly. This screen flow is going to start, and it's going to try and create an account record. So I know that the account name is a required field on Salesforce. There's certain fields that Salesforce itself requires, whether or not you chose to set them as required. So, in this case, you know, by making this field required, I'm not going to allow the user to, finish this step. So I think it's a good option in this case to make the customer name required. I'm going to add on some more text fields because I'm just creating a form, and I'm going to say contact first name, and I'm going to require this too. And I'm going to go here. I'm going to say contact last name. I'm going to make this required, and I'm going to make another one here. I'm going to say phone. And I'm not going to require the phone number. So, the phone number is not required by me to save the record. So for now, all I'm going to do is make that as my only non-required field. So you notice here that I have a header and a footer. So this header, is going to be something that the user sees, and I'm going to say enter customer information. to enter information to create account and contact record. I can choose to show the header or footer. I don't have to use them, but in this case, I want to. And especially in the footer, I want to give the user the option to go next, finish, or pause. In this case, because this is my first screen, I'm going to remove the previous option because there's no previous. This is the beginning. This is the first part of it. So and pause. So this is what I was talking about in the auto launch flow. So as I go through each section of this flow, I'm starting a new interview. So when this, by clicking next, I'm going to another interview, which is another instance in this flow. I can pause this if I wanted to. So say my flow was really, really complex and I had, 18 different screens and, it's a whole, maybe it's like an underwriting process, right? So I'm going through an account, an opportunity, and a bunch of other associated records that make up this customer. And as an underwriter, I'm validating all of the data. And I know that I'm not going to be able to just do it all at once. So I might want to pause it and come back to it. And I'll show how that works. But for now, this is going to be pretty straightforward. So I'm going to drag this here. Okay, and so now I'm going to create records. I'm going to choose to create an account record. I'm going to be making sure that I put in my description. I'm only going to be creating one record here, and I'm going to be using separate resources. So inside of the screen itself, when I was creating those text fields and I was, adding a label and it was creating the API name, that's a new variable that I have available to me to do stuff with. So, the company name, I'm going to map that to my account name. The contact first name, the contact last name, the phone number are all things that I'm going to map, and I'm going to show you. So in this case, I'm going to choose account, and I'm going to be looking for the name. And here you can see from my screen component, I'm not going to be using any constants right now. From my screen component, now I have all those variables. So the customer name is going to be storing the value that was inputted by the end user. And I'm going to add some other fields. Phone. And I'm going to say from my screen component, it's going to be phone. And that's it. So all I'm doing is mapping the values inputted from the screen to fields on a record that I want to create. Oh, and one other thing, I'm going to store this account record in a new variable. So this account is going to be created, and I want to set this account ID to a variable so I can relate it to my other records, my contact and my opportunity. So I'm going to create a new one. And I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm going to call it this account ID. This is the account ID that is created from the first screen in this flow. I don't need this to be a collection. The behavior of this is just going to be for one record. So I'm only going to be creating one account. Input and output would allow me to interact with this variable inside or outside this flow. So for now, I'm only going to be setting these values through a screen. So, when a user starts this flow, they get the screen, they're going to be entering values in that. And that's the way I'm going to make this flow work. If I wanted to set the account ID, this account ID, as available for input or output, I could actually set that value when I'm launching this flow, and have the flow behave a little bit differently. But for this case, I don't need to do that, and I'm not going to check these boxes. So it's important, you don't need to just check stuff because it's there. Make sure that you're choosing the right options for the intent of your flow. This isn't compatible. Okay. Okay, so it's telling me that yeah, it's not allowing me to save this. I chose to set this variable as an account record, so I'm going to set it as, instead of the data type being a record, I'm going to set it as text because I'm just going to be storing the ID. Okay, so I'm going to set this account ID as a variable. And the data type is going to be text because I'm just setting the value of the account ID to this field, and I'm going to use that ID to relate this account to my other records that I'm going to be creating. So I'm going to create another record. Very similar to what I just did for account. I'm going to map different values from I'm going to choose a different object, and then I'm going to choose different values on the contact to map to my screen entered values. So I have a first name. I'm going to do my screen component first name. I have a last name. And I'm going to give this the same phone number as I gave to the account. Now, in this case, I could store this contact ID as a separate variable, but I don't necessarily need to do that because all I want to do is relate this contact to my account that I created. So all I need to do is map the account ID to this account ID, right? So again, from the creation of this account, I'm choosing this account ID. I'm choosing to map the ID of the account that I just created to this account ID. So I'll have the account record in this. I'll have the ID in this that I can use to map to this contact record. So I'm going to map these two together. Now I'm going to choose another screen. So as you go through and as you start building these flows, there's lots of different ways to create them. In this example, I want the user to have two different steps. So the first step is going to be creating the account and the contact, and then the next step is going to be creating the opportunity, which will be the third record. Now, I could certainly have the opportunity creation and all the fields that I'm going to be putting on this screen in the first screen, and I could be creating all three records, at once. But
what I want to highlight here is the ability to, you know, start a process, right? Have some data created, right? And then maybe I need to pause, right? I need the user needs to step away, the user needs to do something else, or imagine this having 15 different steps. It might make sense to put in a step that has like a logical stopping point for the user to do something else that they need to do. So that's why I'm doing the flow in this way. It certainly doesn't have to, you know, necessarily happen this way, but that's what that's what this example and that's what my requirements are telling me in this one. So create opportunity. So this is going to be an opportunity that we're going to be creating. So I'm going to add in a text field. I'm going to say opportunity name. I'm going to require it. I could choose a default value, and I could choose maybe to make it my account name, right? So when a user starts this next screen, instead of it being a blank text field, it'll be the name of the account that was created in the first step. It's a could be a nice option for you depending on your requirements. Depending on how you name opportunities. So for this example, I'll go ahead and set that. Okay. So for my opportunity, I also need to have a close date to be able to save the record. So I'm going to call this my close date. And I'm going to set a default value. And I'm going to say, so this is the flow itself. It's reference to this flow, and it allows me to choose, a date time, and I can choose the current date time or the time when this interview started. So, if this interview started and I paused it, and let's say that was yesterday, that would be the date time here. If I pick this up today, then it would be today. Okay. All right. And so now I'm going to add the opportunity stage. I'm going to make it a pick list. I'm going to choose a pick list choice set. So that's going to allow me to opportunity stage name. Let user choose opportunity stage from pick list. So I'm going to choose opportunity. It's going to be a pick list, and it's going to be stage name. I can choose whether I want it to be ascending or descending. The sort order. So depending on what your current opportunity, your sales process is, and your stage names, you may want to choose. For this case, it doesn't really matter to me that much, so I'm just going to um, just choose that. So in this case, I have my footer here for my navigation. I'm going to leave all the options there. I have create opportunity. Okay. So I'm going to map this to this, and I'm going to create another record. So I'm going to set my account ID to the account ID that I created previously. I'm going to say the name is the opportunity name. I'm going to say the close date is the close date. And I'm going to say the stage name is the opportunity stage. So again, I could choose to store the opportunity ID for, as input or output, but I don't need to do that. And I'm going to map this here. So the default behavior of flow, of screen flow, is that when you finish a flow, if I were to click the finish button, then it would start the flow over again. And so in this case, I don't want to start the flow over again. So I'm going to add another screen that happens after the opportunity is created to take the user to one of the records that I've created on this. So I'm going to create another screen. And I'm going to call this the congratulations screen. So show user a nice message when they finish this process. Okay. So, inside of here, I'm going to choose to display an image. And what I've done earlier is added a static resource. So a static resource is something that you can upload into Salesforce and reference it in other parts of your org, right? For different things. Static resources can be a lot of different things. In this case, I'm going to use my static resource to show an image and store an image. So to create a new static resource, you click new, you give it a name, entering your description, and you can choose a file. I'm not going to go into too many details here, but in this case, all I did was upload an image, and it says congrats. So I'm going to grab the name of it. Whoop. And I'm going to call this congrats image. And the image name is to get the static resource to display here. All I need to do is put the name of the static resource itself in the flow. Okay. And that's all I'm going to do for that. And now I'm going to add in a URL that will take the user to one of the records that I created in this. So I'm going to add display text, and I'm going to call this my redirect URL, and I'm going to enter in some text. And this text could be whatever I want it to be. So in this case, I'm going to take the user to the account that they created. I could choose to take them to the opportunity or the contact or a totally different record, but in this case, I want to go directly to the account that was created for this. I'm going to say, congratulations. Click here to go to your new account. So I have some text that's going to display. All I do is highlight it, add a link, and I'm going to create a relative URL. I'm going to start with a /, open curly, exclamation point, and I'm going to set it to the account ID that I used in this flow. So the variable that I created, this account ID, I'm going to put that here so that the user will be redirected to that flow. Close curly brace. So you notice that this isn't a lookup to an element that I've created in the flow, right? Like so many of these screens have been. So I'm gonna remove the footer because I don't want them to be able to do anything from here. I don't need them to pause it. I don't need them to go to the previous setup. I don't need them to click finish. They're just gonna have this little image and they're gonna have this URL. So I'm gonna click done. I'm gonna map this. I want to go to manager and I want to make sure that, yep, okay, this account ID and my link are the same. So, okay, right, I'm going to save this. I'm going to call this easy create new customer. Simple screen flow for reps to create an account, contact, and opportunity. Okay. Okay. So the cool thing about the screen flow, like I mentioned earlier from the auto launch flow, is that I'll have a lot better options to debug this. So I can choose to either run this or debug this. In this case, I'm going to choose debug. It'll do basically the same thing in allowing me to run the flow itself, but the debug is going to show me what records are creating and how the flow is acting as I'm running the flow. So I'm going to click debug. Okay. And I can see here, right, as I was talking about earlier, I have an interview that has started. And this is the flow. This is what the users are going to see, right? So here's my header, here's my footer, and here's my screen. New account. And I'm going to say John Doe. And in this case, I'm going to put in a phone number. And now I'm going to click next. So if everything works correctly, I'm going to create a new account and a new contact. Um, when you're debugging this stuff, when you're running this in debug mode, or if I clicked run from the other one, I'm actually creating records inside of Salesforce. So this flow is actually going to save a record when I do this. So, you know, if I were running this in production per se, um, you know, that's something to be aware of, that you would actually be creating new records inside of your org. Okay, and I got all this great detail here. So I can see stuff that happened. I entered in information into my text box for customer name, and it gave me the value at runtime, which is new account. I have John Doe for my contact first name, last name, and my phone number. I clicked next, and I have created an account and I've created a contact. The account name, it looks like everything was mapped correctly. So the account that I created got my account name. The phone number on the account was the phone number. I stored my account ID to this account ID. And then I created a contact where the account ID on the contact was the account ID that I created and stored to my this account variable. And the first name and last name were what I set on the screen, as well as the phone number. And I created a new record, which is great. So remember, another thing that, you know, another thing I did in the flow was set the opportunity name to be the account name, and that looks like that worked correctly here. And I'm going to leave that here. So my opportunity stage, you know, so again, going back to, you know, what I had mentioned about, you know, what your sales process looks like and what you currently have it set to, whether you have it, set, you know, how you want it set to sort. You know, this in this case, right, my default value is close loss. So I'm going to say I want my default value. I want my value to be prospecting. So I'm going to set that. Um, and the close date here. So I'm going to leave that. You know, I'm fine with what that is. So I'm going to click next. And I see here that it looks like my opportunity got successfully created. I created it. It related to my account ID. I have my close date, my name, and that's it. It's been created, which is really cool. So now, if I click this, I go directly to the account that I created. I can see that I have a contact that I created, John Doe, and I have an opportunity, and they all related to themselves, which is really, really cool. So, you know, even though I was going through this debug screen and I see this additional detail here, that's basically the experience that the user is going to have outside of this additional detail, the debug details that you might need to use to help troubleshoot your flow. So now what I'm going to do is um, activate this because I'm happy with what it looks like. And I'm going to go here to my easy create new customer, and I'm going to view the details and versions. So what's cool here is I have a URL to this flow, and this is what's going to allow me to actually kick off this flow and basically publish it in my org where I want to. And so in this case, I'm going to add this to the account list view. So I go to home, setup, object manager. I went to account. I'm going to go to buttons, links, and actions. And I'm going to create a new button. And I'm going to call this easy create new customer. Button to launch flow easy create new customer. So I don't remember exactly what I named my flow, right? Going back to what I said earlier, take a little bit of extra time and make sure that you're naming your stuff correctly and that you're using the right things. So in this case, I did name my flow easy create new customer, but I think it's worth noting that going to you know going to grab or ensure that I wrote the right name here in my description field will just really help me troubleshoot stuff later on when I'm not as familiar with this. I mean, this stuff is all really vivid to me right now because I'm doing it right now. But after I've created 10 other flows and 6 months have passed, what I did for this one might not come back to me as easily. So okay, so I'm gonna make this a list button, and I don't need to I don't need to display checkboxes for multi-record select, not for this example at least. And I'm gonna go to my flow. I'm gonna grab the URL. Okay, and that's it. So now I'm creating a new button, and the URL is just what I have here, the flow URL. And what that's going to do is when I expose this button on the list view, it's going to launch the flow. Okay. So now I'm going to go to search layouts for classic Salesforce because I have my list view option here. I'm going to edit it. And I have a button available to me that I'm going to add there. I could add other buttons, I could do whatever, but in this case, all I want to do is give the user the option to start a flow from an accounts list view, right? So I could certainly add this button to a detail page of an account, if I wanted to. In this case, because the process is just to create a new account and contact an opportunity, I think it makes the most sense to just add it to the list view. If I had another screen flow to maybe create an opportunity off an account that I was on, then maybe that would make sense to do it from a detail page so I was on that record. But in this case, I'm creating a brand new customer, which in this case entails an account, an opportunity, and a contact. Okay. And so here we go. So, now, imagine that this is live. I'm an end user actually, using this flow. I'm going to create, a new customer. And I'm happy with all this. I know that the opportunity was closed, lost for whatever reason. I just want to, do this. So here we go. Okay, cool. So I have my new customer. I have a phone number. I have a contact, and I have an opportunity. Um, one thing I want to highlight too is that um, because I put in a phone number, my active flag got set to yes because I have another flow that's still active. So, it's pretty cool. You can see that um, in this case, I have two flows running on this, right? So I have a process that will set the flag for me either active or no, and I have a screen flow that's going to allow me to easily create new records. So one more thing I want to show is how to pause flows and what that looks like. So um, out of the box, Salesforce gives you a Lightning component to view pause flow interviews. So I'm going to just show you how to get that. So this is the home page I have for this app. And I can see here in my standard list of components, I can choose to add paused interviews. I could choose filters. I could get dynamic with it like most things in Lightning. But in this case, I just want to see all paused flow interviews. So, um, you know, uh, right, going back to what I said earlier, if this flow was a really big flow and had multiple steps, more than just two, and the screens were bigger that required a lot more input, it might make sense to expose this to my end user so that they could pick up where they left off. So they could, you know, I can see here I can either resume it or delete it. Maybe I don't want to, do this, finish this flow. Maybe I want to do it later. So let's go over that. So I'm going to click start my new flow. So I did the first step, but I'm not ready to do the opportunity, so I'm going to do pause. Waiting information from customer. So I don't have all the information I need to finish this, so I'm going to, put that as my reason, and my flow is now paused. So if I go here, I see here that I have this sorted oldest to newest, so I'm going to do newest to oldest, and here it is. Here's my interview. So if I look at my accounts, let me see here. I believe I called it pause. Yeah, show pause. So, even though I paused that flow, I still created my account and my account itself, right? The contact and the account. So if I go home, oh, let me just make sure I show you. And there's no opportunity. Okay. So let's resume this. Okay. Okay. So I still have my account, I have my contacts, and I have my opportunity. So that's it. That's how you can leverage flows to automate your processes and give users a nice guided screen flow process to help automate and make business processes a lot easier. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot. Um, we're going to go over some more complex uh, scenarios and use cases with flows later on. But in the meantime, for more information on anything, you can go to apexhours.com. You can go to the YouTube channel, Facebook, or Trailblazer community groups. That's it. Thanks.